Hello, and a very good morning to everyone here. I hope you can hear me well. I have been considering purchasing a microphone, but I found that even after recording myself, if you just increase the volume on your device, wherever you may be listening, it's simple enough to hear. Anyway, I came across a very interesting paper. It is titled The Body in Psychoanalysis, and it's by Alexandre Stevens. I think he's a Frenchman. He's even set up an institute of training in Belgium, I think. But there's a reason why, or rather, there are a few reasons why I think this topic is of note. So, one of the chief critics presently of the Lubana school of psychoanalysis, perhaps the most predominant tendency carrying forth the Lacanian break, the Lacanian legacy, would be a person named, what's his name? A tall, fair chap. He's a postdoctoral researcher in Humboldt. I probably have a book by him saved somewhere. Yes, the author of The Capitalist Unconscious, Samo Tomsic. Now, in another paper by Samo, he had um, tried to, in some ways, address the issue of what some other people have referred to as bodily alienation. That is a disambiguation between what we think we are placed as vis-a-vis ourselves and what it is that our bodies may be doing presently. It's not as much a disassociation as it is as simple as not knowing, for instance, what causes a symptom, which is a very regular phenomena for very many people. You may have a headache without knowing precisely what triggered it. In fact, very often it would be a comminglation of causes. And in treating any such condition, it becomes an issue as to how can we in some ways identify how a substance interacts with the body to see as to whether the body is able to receive it in a way that is beneficial and also make use of it in ways that produces effects that can mitigate some of the um, harmful uh, processes such as inflammation in the case of a headache, or may even perhaps produce desirable effects such as pleasure or excitement in watching a film and things of that nature. And at this anatomical level, we are not really speaking merely of the psyche per se, or rather, we begin to realize that psychoanalysis was always already grounding the psyche in the sight of the body, which is what any materialist doctrine would try and do in any case. Now, that said, this is yet a psychoanalytic practice. And what do I mean by this? I mean that it would hinge on the practice of a discourse that is the spoken word between the analysand and the analysee. And here, the operational medium of the logic would be the signifier. And this is something, and rather, the way in which this functions in the clinical procedure is something that Alexander Stevens notices very closely. And I made a few notes on his paper, which I'd like to share with you. It is the very principle of the signifier that makes present against a background of absence, and absent against a background of presence. It appears what is being referred to here is the principle of law and its constitutive exception. This, as psychoanalysis has shown us, often, if not only, works retroactively, in the sense that we are alerted to or made aware of a law only in terms of its effects, that is, only when a constitutive exception forces them to reveal themselves. Indeed, this was Lacan's decisive insight, which allowed him to break from Freud. The minimal degree of sublation necessary to move from the name of the father to the symbolic order, a transition whose possibilities, it may be stated, Freud, especially the later Freud of civilization and its discontents, was not entirely blind to. Yet, let us tarry a step back for a moment. What does it mean to speak of a structure apparent only in its effects? What kind of causality are we then speaking of? In other words, the question remains an Althusserian one, i.e., what is a structural causality? Or, in this case, what is the relation between the unconscious and the id? Or, perhaps as some Victorians may say, table manners gone wrong. The place of the critique of political economy may also be found here. The necessity of sublation, because the unconscious is situated on the basis of the signifier, is in many ways pointed out via this site in discourse. The signifier would hence serve as a basis of separating the id from the unconscious, perhaps hence producing non-pathologically the stability of the ego. Jouissance, even in Lacan, was for a long time linked to what was forbidden, and deferrals to make much of this to quote, in other words, it can be obtained only if it is refused. Jouissance, and I guess there is some play on the see, this is something that I would like to repeat here. In other words, it can be obtained only if it is refused. You cannot take for granted that it is the same it that is being referred to, even if it is in the same sentence. Because what we, in many ways, are speaking about is not necessarily a transaction, though that would be the most readily accepted place where such a operation is found. But in any inquiry, you seek something that you do not have. That is almost the precondition of it. And very often you offer something instead. And yet there may be arguments, disagreements regarding the terms of the exchange. And sometimes this calls for a refashioning or a remaking of the terms in question. People represent parties constantly. I mean, whether you like it or not, you've grown up in households, you've gone to schools, and you carry with yourselves ideas about what the world is and hence should be. And this would inflect the ways in which you negotiate spaces and things of that kind. And yet, what causes for, or what rather, what permits for a sublationary moment is always a way in which a certain kind of agreement is reached. And very often, the first step to do that is to understand what we can begin recognizing as that which is common between us, and perhaps constitutively that which would not be. Jouissance, however, changes when no longer attached to a prohibition. It becomes a body event. Lacan: the body is insofar as it has enjoyed itself. It was only in these terms that Lacan was able to formulate feminine jouissance. Miller: the body appears here as the other of the signifier, which is what Lacan implied by saying that the other is the body. Interesting how this sentence would change so much with a small o, the other is the body. But without the prohibition, paternal or otherwise, we lose the link between the other of the signifier and the other of truth, as in a whole in the symbolic order, if not another one, which is to say, another logic. This is the meaning of the paternal metaphor. Without meaning, we are left merely with the corpus. Now, there are a few fairly obvious links which could be made here and which yet should be mentioned. The idea of a communion, holy or otherwise, a commingling of people meeting for common ends, perhaps as simple as sharing a meal to perhaps, I don't know, creating a new society, begins with the idea that beyond an amalgamation of bodies and languages, there may also be at the site where, perhaps at the site where these touch, truths. And this was Badiou's axiom, which permits him to, in some ways, tether together a understanding of what binds the worlds in which people inhabit, which in many ways, perhaps formalistically, would be an understanding of the contractual arrangements which bind them and the other forms of associations, day passes for public transport, etc., etc. Yet the chief reason, or rather why I picked this up, this paper that is to in some ways foreground the site of the body as a direction in which psychoanalysis may choose to extend its investigations. Psychoanalysis, which has often not relegated but perhaps fixated its own attentions on cultural discourses, of course, cinema being chief amongst them, most notably um, in the body of Zizek's work. Just a thought for the morning. I thought I'd introduce it to you, and I do wish you a good day. If you want, I'll leave the notes for this reading as well in the description. But hopefully it was clear enough. Bye bye.